Okay, congratulations. You have now completed week 1 of this class, Reason, Argue, Refute, Critical Thinking About Anything. So now it's time to take exam number 1 on basic logic concepts and all 17 of the informal fallacies of reasoning. It's very important when you take exam number 1 and you're presented with an example of a proposed fallacy that first of all you ask yourself this question. Is this a fallacy because of some irrelevant material in the premises? If that's the case, then you can identify the fallacy in the category of relevance. If, on the other hand, there's some presumption in the premises that prevent the premises from driving the conclusion by logical necessity, well, if that's the case, then you can look into the category of presumption and find the correct fallacy. And lastly, there may be some double meaning, some ambiguity buried or even obvious in the premises that prevent the premises from inferring the conclusion with logical necessity, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for a valid deductive argument to begin with. But as we know, the most important thing in this class is learning the distinction between a valid argument and a sound argument. Valid arguments are very easy to construct. For example, all communists are Catholics, premise number 1. Premise number 2, all Russians are communists. Now, what necessary conclusion would follow from that? Well, very simple. All Russians are Catholics. And you can see how the argument is valid. If the premises were true, that conclusion would have to be true. But we know from experience that the premises are not true. Neither of them are true. And even the conclusion is not true. Nevertheless, the argument is valid. So, the word to the wise is always look for validity before you consider the truth of the premises, because truth of the premises does not govern logical validity. For an argument to be valid, all that's necessary is that the premises necessitate the conclusion by necessity, by entailment. But for soundness, soundness has 2 requirements, 2 necessary conditions. Number 1, the argument deductively must be valid, but number 2, the premises must be true. Then you have a sound argument. And that's the holy grail. That's the object of this class, is to get each of us into a situation where we can evaluate and formulate and refute arguments based upon their validity and or their soundness. So let's get to it. Let's first of all review the basic logic concepts, and then we'll review in preparation for the exam with the 17 informal fallacies of reasoning. Okay, before we move on to our next learning objective, informal fallacies of reasoning, let's take a few moments to recap what we should have been learning about basic logic concepts. Now, after our study of basic logic concepts, we should be able to recognize the 2 parts of any deductive argument or inductive argument. But let's take the deductive arguments as a focus for now. Premises and conclusions. These are the 2 parts of an argument. We know that both premises and conclusions are what we call propositional truth claims. Any sentence or any part of a sentence that claims that something is the case or that something is not the case is what we call a proposition. Now, in a deductive argument, when the premises entail the conclusion by logical necessity, by strict logical entailment, then we have a valid deductive argument. And when that does not happen, because not all arguments are valid, when that does not happen, then the argument is called invalid. So that's the first thing you should be able to understand about basic logic concepts, that the issue of validity for the argument itself and the issue of the truth, the factual truth, or the analytic truth of the premises, these are separate issues, and you have to keep those separate. The other thing you should learn about basic logic concepts is that explanations are not the same thing as arguments.
Explanations tell us who, what, when, where, or even why something is the case, but only an argument gives us reasons to accept a proposition called a conclusion. We should also understand the basic difference between deductive reasoning or deductive argumentation and inductive reasoning or inductive argumentation. Deductive reasoning, our concern right now, promises us absolute truth about the conclusion proposition that is stated, provided that the premises are factually true and provided that the premises entail the conclusion by strict logical necessity. If that is not the case, then the argument is invalid. Now, we know from our study of basic logical concepts that not all deductive arguments that are valid also turn out to be sound. For instance, take the argument deductively, all guns kill, first premise. Second premise, all humans are guns, leading to the conclusion by entailment that therefore all humans kill. Now, that's a perfectly valid argument, but as I think we'll all agree, the premises are very suspicious and probably not true. So therefore, the important thing about studying basic logic concepts is that the issue of validity for an argument is a different issue than the factual truth or the simple analytic truth of the premises. It's very important to keep those separated. Many people confuse them, and therefore they do not understand how to use deductive reasoning. We also should examine the relationship between factually true propositions and valid deductive arguments a little further. It is really improper, as we now know, to say about a proposition, a truth claim, that it's valid. No, validity only refers to arguments. It would be equally fallacious if we said that a given deductive argument is factually true. No. Arguments are either valid or invalid. Propositions are either true or false. If you keep that straight, you'll find that you'll learn a lot more about logic and critical thinking. Because the value of a critical thinker is that a critical thinker pursues valid and sound reasoning. We also have to understand the precise definition between validity and soundness of a deductive argument. There are two conditions that are necessary for a sound deductive argument. First of all, it has to be valid. The premises must entail the conclusion by logical necessity. Okay? The second condition is the premises must be factually true. If those two conditions are met, then we have a valid argument that is also a sound argument. And this is the goal of becoming a critical thinker. We want our reasoning to be sound, and we do not want to make mistakes in the process of reasoning. Which, of course, leads us to our very next learning objective, informal fallacies of reasoning.
Okay, let's do our preparation for exam number 1 by going through the highlights of the informal fallacies of reasoning that we have mastered so far in 3 different categories. The categories of relevance, the category of presumption, and the category of ambiguity. Now, we know that informal fallacies derail rational thinking, and informal fallacies, I want to say at the outset, can be used intentionally by politicians, by preachers, by professors, by philosophers, anyone really who is interested in deceiving and pulling a fast one in the process of reasoning can actually use informal fallacies as a tool, as a weapon of persuading people. So here we're simply trying to get you used to the idea of looking for the mistake. Fallacies are mistakes in reasoning, so we know that. But if you know what the mistake is at the outset, then you can easily refute or make a counter argument to whatever argument topic is in play. So let's share the screen, and we're going to be seeing some of the highlights that we have here on, here we are. First of all, the category of relevance. Relevance fallacies rely on premises that might seem to be related to the conclusion when, in fact, they are not related at all, necessarily or even accidentally. And there are 7 major fallacies of relevance that we're going to be studying here. And let's just scroll down. This is from the textbook. I believe this is on page 18, I believe. First of all, we have the ad ignorantiam. Ad ignorantiam is a very dangerous fallacy because it's quite often used in witchcraft and superstition and astrology. For instance, no one has disproved that astrology is wrong, so therefore astrology must be correct. That's an example. Lack of evidence proves nothing either way. So if somebody offers to you that you should accept their conclusion because there's no evidence for a contrary conclusion, that is a fallacy ad ignorantiam. That's the Latin for it, but it's the argument from ignorance. In the argument from inappropriate authority, it's the Latin name for that is ad verecundiam. Somebody is capitalizing on their fame or their knowledge in a certain field. They may be a Nobel laureate, but what do they know about a Pontiac car? Or what do they know about buying a Porsche car? Are they any better skilled at doing this? And so the Porsche company or the Pontiac company, they offer this Nobel laureate in poetry, by the way. They offer him millions of dollars to endorse their automobiles. But this is an inappropriate authority. So when somebody offers themselves as an authority in a certain field that's outside of their field, then you can see that there's an argument from inappropriate authority called ad verecundiam. Now, the argument against the person, this is quite common on Facebook. This is quite common in politics. This is quite common in bantering of all kinds when we attack the person rather than the topic and the argument that that person is using. When the attack is made against the person because of some attribute of theirs, let's say they're bald or they're short or they're overweight, or that's abusive. We call that abusive ad hominem. And on the exam, we'll distinguish between the abusive and the other kind of ad hominem is what is called the circumstantial. That's when we say, oh, well, he's from New York and you know what they're like. So, I'm not going to listen to their tax policy because New York is there, who's going to listen to them? So when we attack a person because of an attribute that's just part of their nature, or when that's abusive ad hominem, when we attack them because they are associated with a group as a stereotype. So stereotyping is really what we are talking about here with the ad hominem circumstantial. Here we have the argument from emotion. The argument from emotion called ad populum. You've heard this many, many times. Well, everybody does it. Everybody cheats on their taxes. So it's okay if you cheat on your taxes because everybody cheats on their taxes. Everybody has sex outside of marriage. Everybody has sex in the Oval Office. I mean, you hear all kinds of outlandish claims based upon what somebody thinks is popular. So ad populum, you can see the word popular right in there. So that's not difficult. Argument from pity. This is a very popular one, ad misericordiam. You can see the word misery right in ad misericordiam, right in the Latin. Ad misericordiam, very, very popular with people who get stopped for speeding, and they tell the cop, well, I'm on my way to the hospital. My wife is having a 15th child. If you take away my license, I can't go to work. I can't support the 15 children. And by the way, I have lung cancer. And by the way, I had an amputated left leg, and so forth and so on. You get the point. So when we shift the burden of proof for a claim, for a truth claim, remember now that's what we're after. We're after valid and sound arguments that end in factually true conclusions. That's what we want to find out. When we substitute that by an appeal to pity or some motion of struggle or misery, then we've committed the fallacy called ad misericordiam. Here's one that's used very subtly. This is a subtle one. It's called ad baculum. It's from the Latin word for stick or club or cudgel. and it's the appeal to force. It can be very blunt, like putting a gun to somebody's head and saying, give me all your money or I'll kill you. Or it can be very subtle, like, you're up for promotion now, aren't you? And I'm going to be reviewing you for the promotion. So I would like you to count on your vote for president of the local union. Well, that's coercion. So it can be a violent threat. That's a very extreme case, or it can be a mild case of coercion. And it's very effective. A lot of people use this. Here's one that's very popular. It's called irrelevant conclusion. The Latin name is ignoratio elenchi, which means ignorance of the refutation. And this is when the premises miss the point entirely, purporting to support one conclusion while in fact it's supporting another. The example that I have here in the book is, this is ridiculous. Here I am being ticketed and fined for speeding while thugs are roaming the streets committing violent crimes at will. This is different from the ad misericordiam. You notice that, right? Misericordiam, that says, pity, pity me, poor, poor, pitiful me. This one says, hey, officer, you're not doing your job. Here you are chasing me down for speeding, and really you should be out chasing down those drug dealers or those terrorists or something like that. So those are the seven informal fallacies in the category of relevance. Now let's take a look at the category of presumption. Buried assumptions are landmines in good reasoning. And it's very important that you spot these things and snuff them out before they take hold of your reasoning process. The first one we consider is the complex question. When a question is asked in such a way as to presuppose the truth of some assumption or buried in the original question, then the complex question fallacy is committed. It's like this. It's like, you go to your neighbor, you say, how long have you been beating your dog? Well, that presumes that your neighbor has already started to beat the dog. So when you make a presumption in a question, it's usually going to be a complex question fallacy. Not very difficult to spot. Hit my example here. What color paint are you drinking today that makes you say something that absurd? Okay. Well, we first of all have to prove that they're drinking paint. This is one of the more important ones. It comes up in law, politics, academics, circles, science, and it's called the false cause fallacy. And its false cause proper name in Latin is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which translates to after this, therefore because of this. This is when we falsely suppose that simply because something happened prior to another event, then therefore that must be a cause of an event. For instance, if you lend your phone to someone to make a call, and then they return the phone later on in the day to you, and the phone doesn't work anymore, you immediately jump to the conclusion that the presumption that, this person somehow destroyed my phone, broke my phone. No, there may be another reason. The phone may be defective. So you can see how false cause can be a very, very important. The example I have here, my dad cheated on his taxes last year and his business went belly up this year. That's how karma works. So you often hear people using the karma argument, but there's no way to prove the existence of karma. It's a superstition. Here's one, petitio principii. Technically speaking, all informal fallacies are begging the question, because all informal fallacies, since they miss the target of the conclusion, therefore the conclusion is being begged. But there's an overt way in which we can beg the question. Here's an example. The reason I'm so popular is that everybody likes me. Well, that's the same thing as being popular, right? So begging the question is when you somehow twist the premises to actually state the same thing that the conclusion is stating. So it's very sophisticated, and intellectuals like to use this one a lot. Now, here are a pair of fallacies that complete the set in the fallacies of presumption. Accident and converse accident. Now, these are very similar to another set of fallacies we're going to study in a few seconds called composition and division. All right, but they're in different categories. Accident and converse accident, these are in the fallacy category of presumption. What is being presumed? Something is being presumed about a general rule or a general policy or a general practice that really doesn't apply to an unusual situation. So, for instance, when one applies a generalization of a principle or general rule to an unusual individual case that it does not properly govern, then the fallacy of accident is committed. Example, anyone swimming in the city reservoir will be prosecuted and fined. The police should therefore arrest and prosecute the paramedic that rescued a drowning child who fell into the reservoir. Well, obviously, the prohibition against swimming in the reservoir should not cover first responders rescuing a child, obviously. Now, the converse of that is when we take an unusual case and try to infer a general rule based upon the unusual case. This is a hasty generalization. Oprah Winfrey is a woman and she is paid more money than any male talk show host. Therefore, female talk show hosts, as a rule, are paid more money than male talk show hosts. Well, Oprah Winfrey is a very unusual lady, a very, very smart lady, a great businesswoman, great drive, great talent. It does not therefore follow that simply because she is getting a lot of money, that everybody who's not Oprah Winfrey is being paid the same amount of money. So that completes our set of fallacies, informal fallacies of presumption. Now let's take a look at the last category, ambiguity fallacies. And by the way, ambiguity fallacies are very popular with comedians. You know that? Almost every joke that you've ever heard in your life or that you've ever tried to make up, or every time you've chuckled when you've heard a clever line being spoken, is somehow a twist and a utilization of the fallacies of ambiguity. Mental misdirection is the basis of all humor. A good joke teller is somebody who gets your mind going in one direction and then pulls the rug out from under you, and actually there's another conclusion that comes. And it's very funny. But however, when ambiguity infects reasoning, then erroneous conclusions usually result. Nothing can be inferred with certainty from ambiguity because ambiguity means confusion of at least two meanings of the terms that are being discussed in the debate. Very important, very, very important. Here's our first one. It's called equivocation. You probably have heard about equivocation. That's when we equivocate. The word love, for instance. Oh, I love you, my dear. Oh, but I love my cat. Do I love my cat the same way I love you, my dear? No. So we're using the word love ambiguously. When some word or phrase is used with two or more meanings deliberately or accidentally in the formulation of an argument, then the fallacy of equivocation is committed. Here's an example. All rare books are expensive. All great novels are rare books. Therefore, all great novels are expensive. What? No. Now, my favorite in this category is called amphibole. Amphibole. That's how you pronounce it. And just learning the term, well, it might get you a couple of smiles and nods of the head at a cocktail party. Because you know an esoteric word. But amphibole simply is, it's an equivocation writ large on a whole sentence. So equivocation is either one word ambiguously portrayed or a phrase ambiguously portrayed. But amphibole, when one of the statements in an argument has more than one plausible meaning due to the loose or the awkward way in which the words of that statement are combined, then the fallacy of amphibole is committed. Here's my favorite example. There's a sign in a laundromat. Customers are required to remove all their clothes when dryers stop. I wouldn't try to use that as an excuse if you were arrested for indecent exposure in front of a judge. Then we have the fallacy of accent. Now, comics love to use this one because depending upon how you accent a word, you can actually change its meaning. Here's one of my favorite examples that I learned from my Jewish friends at a Jewish delicatessen. My name is Fink, and what do you think? I'll press your pants for nothing? When read in the vocal accent of the declarative sentence, it means that you get a free pair of pants being pressed. However, when you read with the vocal accent of a question, it means, do you really think I'm going to press your pants for free? So here are the two ways that you could read the line as a comic. My name is Fink, and what do you think? I'll press your pants for nothing. Oi, schmoy. Now you read it as a question. Listen to how the meaning completely changes. My name is Fink. And what do you think? I'll press your pants for nothing. Oi, schmoy. Same thing, same exact sentence, but the accent changes the meaning. Now, remember I just told you that in the category of presumption, accident, and converse accident, these are hasty generalizations about a rule, a principle, or a policy that is generally true, but in certain exceptional situations, like first responders saving a drowning child in a reservoir, it would be fallacious to try to apply that rule to those first responders. Well, here in the category of ambiguity, we have two fallacies that are called composition and division. Now, the confusion here, the hasty generalization here, is not about a principle or a rule or a policy. It's about a part in relationship to the whole group that part is part of. All right. So, for instance, let's take a naval fleet, a fleet of warships, has many ships in the fleet. The fallacy I could be committing if I were to infer, for instance, that because one ship was not ready for battle or maneuvers, then therefore the entire fleet is not ready for the maneuvers. Conversely, I could say that, the entire fleet is ready for the maneuvers or the battle, therefore every single ship must be ready for battle or the maneuvers. So composition is the first one we study. Composition is when we mistakenly reason from the attributes of a part. So this is going from the part, let's say one particular ship in the fleet, and then we try to infer a general conclusion concerning the whole fleet. Or when one reasons mistakenly from the attributes of an individual member of some collection to the attributes of the totality of that collection. About rare books, there may be exceptions in the rare books. So this is arguing from the attributes of one member of a group, and then trying to infer that same inference concerning the entire group itself. Here's an example. I'm thinking of buying a new Macintosh ebook computer, but I found out that the onboard speakers are really very inexpensive and cheap. Therefore, the laptop itself must be really inexpensive or cheap. No, not necessarily so. If you check the prices of Apple computers, you know that's not true. Some of the parts are quite inexpensive. That does not mean that the whole thing is inexpensive. So that's arguing from the part to the whole. And division is just the reverse. When conversely, the fallacy of division is committed when one reasons mistakenly from the attributes of the whole thing to the attributes of the parts. To use the Apple computer example, if I were to say, wow, this Apple computer is very expensive, therefore every single part in the computer must be expensive. Wrong. Fallacy of division. So please keep these straight. Now you can see why I'm encouraging you to learn what mistake is being made before you try to name that fallacy. So first of all, look at a suspicious argument, either formally or informally, and ask yourself, what's the mistake? Is the mistake some issue of relevance here? These premises are not relevant to the conclusion. Maybe, on the other hand, it's some presumption in the premises that really needs to be cleared up and verified before we can accept that as a workable true premise. Or maybe there's some ambiguous word, phrase, or whole sentence that is confused with double meanings. Once you identify the proper mistake, you can then drill down into that category, and you'll usually correctly identify the fallacy. So that's my recap for part 2 of exam number 1. Informal fallacies of reason, all 17 of them. It took us just a few minutes to go through them. So please study them in the textbook and use this information to do very well on the exam. The exam link will be sent to you, and then you'll also receive the analytics about your performance automatically. So good luck and happy hunting to name that fallacy.